He saved her children from the flames, so the alien queen gave him everything. When stars bleed silver, the asteroid field around mining station Helix 7 had always been treacherous, but today it seemed particularly vindictive. Captain Jackson Thorne squinted through the cracked viewport of his salvage ship, watching chunks of space rock tumble past like drunken dancers. His vessel, affectionately nicknamed the Rust Bucket by anyone who'd seen its patchwork hull, groaned as it navigated between the floating debris. "Another thrilling day in paradise," Jackson muttered, taking a swig from his thermos of what passed for coffee in the outer rim. The liquid tasted like motor oil mixed with regret, but it kept him awake during the long shifts of hunting valuable minerals in the asteroid field. His ship's communication system crackled to life with the voice of Station Commander Reeves. "Thorne, you out there picking through rocks again?" "Where else would I be, Commander? The asteroids don't mind themselves." Jackson adjusted his ship's heading to avoid a particularly large chunk of iron ore. "What's the situation?" "We've got incoming traffic, big luxury liner, diplomatic vessel. The Stellar Majesty is requesting safe passage through the field." Reeves's tone carried a warning. "Keep your distance and mind your manners. These aren't regular tourists." Jackson rolled his eyes. Rich folks and their fancy ships thinking the universe owed them a clear path. "Copy that. I'll try not to offend anyone with my existence." He was adjusting his mining laser's calibration when the explosion lit up his viewport like a miniature sun. The shockwave hit moments later, sending the rust bucket tumbling. Jackson fought to regain control, his hands dancing across the controls as emergency alarms wailed. "What in the void was that?" he shouted into his comm. Reeves' voice came through, broken with static. "The Stellar Majesty. She's hit something. Massive hull breach. Jackson, they're breaking apart." Through the clearing debris cloud, Jackson could see the luxury liner. What had once been an elegant vessel now resembled a dying whale. Its sleek hull cracked open and venting atmosphere in ghostly streams. Pieces of the ship spun away into the asteroid field, and small escape pods dotted the space around it like scattered seeds. "I'm seeing multiple escape pods," Jackson reported, already changing course toward the wreckage. "Some are intact, others—" He didn't finish the sentence. Some of the pods had been crushed by asteroids or damaged in the initial collision. The rust bucket might not look like much, but she was tough and maneuverable, perfect for rescue, work in dangerous terrain. "Negative, Thorne," Reeves commanded. "Stay back. We're sending proper rescue vessels. By the time they get here, anyone still alive won't be." Jackson was already powering up his ship's emergency medical systems and clearing space in his cargo hold. Besides, when have I ever listened to proper procedure? The first pod he reached contained a family of tourists, shaken but alive. He transferred them to his ship and continued searching. The second pod held a diplomat's aide who kept mumbling about important documents. Pod after pod, Jackson pulled survivors from the wreckage, his small ship filling with frightened passengers. It was on his fifth rescue run that his scanners detected something unusual. Deep within the liner's twisted hull, life signs flickered. Multiple readings, small and weak. The scanner's analysis suggested they were children. "Commander, I'm reading survivors inside the main hull. Looks like kids." "Impossible. The hull's been compromised for 20 minutes. Nothing could survive in there." But Jackson was already suiting up in his emergency gear. The rust bucket's docking clamps locked onto a relatively stable section of the liner's hull, and he prepared to enter the ship. The magnetic seals on his suit checked green, and he grabbed his emergency kit. "Jackson, don't be an idiot." Reeves's voice crackled through his helmet comm. "That section could collapse at any moment." "Yeah, well, apparently I specialize in being an idiot." He cycled through the airlock and stepped into the ruined corridor of the luxury liner. The inside of the Stellar Majesty was a nightmare of twisted metal and sparking electronics. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows, and the artificial gravity flickered on and off, making every step treacherous. Jackson followed his scanner's readings deeper into the ship, past elegant staterooms now filled with debris, and along corridors that groaned ominously with each movement. The life signs were coming from what had once been a children's recreational area. The door was jammed, but Jackson's plasma cutter made quick work of the obstacles. When he finally broke through, what he found stopped him cold. 3 children, huddled together in the corner of the room, protected by some kind of shimmering energy barrier. They weren't human. Their skin had a subtle silver tint, and their eyes were larger than normal, reflecting light like polished mirrors. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10 years old, and she was holding 2 smaller children protectively. "It's okay," Jackson said softly, approaching slowly. "I'm here to help." The oldest child looked up at him with those strange, beautiful eyes. When she spoke, her voice carried an odd musical quality. "Are you the rescue person?" "I guess I am. What are your names?" "I am Nyx," the girl said formally. "These are my siblings, Orion and Vega." She gestured to a boy about 8 years old and a tiny girl who couldn't have been more than 4. As Jackson got closer, he realized the energy barrier was coming from a device on Nyx's wrist, some kind of personal shield generator far more advanced than anything he'd seen before. These weren't ordinary passengers. "We need to get you out of here," he said. "Can you walk?" Nyx nodded, but little Vega whimpered and reached up toward Jackson. Without thinking, he scooped her up in his arms. She was surprisingly light, and she clung to him with small fingers that seemed to glow faintly in the emergency lighting. The journey back to his ship was harrowing. The liner shuddered and groaned around them, pieces of bulkhead crashing down as the asteroid field continued to batter the hull. Jackson carried Vega while Nyx helped Orion, who seemed to be in shock. The boy hadn't spoken a word since Jackson found them. They were almost to the airlock when a section of ceiling collapsed directly in their path. Jackson pushed the children back, as debris rained down, cutting off their escape route. "There's another way," Nyx said quietly. "Through the service corridors." She led them through a maze of maintenance tunnels that were barely wide enough for an adult. Jackson had to admire the girl's composure. She navigated the confusing passages as if she'd memorized the ship's blueprints. When they finally reached the Rust Bucket's airlock, he practically collapsed with relief. "Everyone okay?" he asked as they sealed the hatch behind them. Vega was still clinging to him, but she managed a small smile. Orion had started speaking, again asking rapid questions about the ship's engines in that same musical accent. Nyx simply nodded, but Jackson caught her wiping away tears she thought no one would see. As they cleared the wreckage and headed back to Station Helix 7, Jackson found himself wondering who these children really were. Their clothes were simple enough, but the materials were unlike anything he'd seen. The personal shield device on Nyx's wrist was worth more than his entire ship. And there was something about the way they carried themselves, a quiet dignity that seemed unusual for children who'd just survived a shipwreck. His questions were answered when they docked at the station. A sleek, elegant vessel had arrived. While he was conducting rescues, a ship that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, its hull covered in intricate patterns that shifted and flowed like living art. The docking bay had been cleared except for Station Commander Reeves and a small honor guard of station security. As Jackson emerged from his ship with the 3 children, a figure glided down the ramp of the elegant vessel. She was tall and graceful, with the same silver-tinted skin as the children, but somehow more luminous. Her hair flowed around her shoulders, like liquid starlight, and when she moved it was with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to command. Her eyes, the same mirror-bright eyes as the children, swept across the docking bay before settling on the small group. "Mother!" Vega broke free from Jackson's hand and ran toward the figure, followed quickly by her siblings. The woman, no, the queen, for that's clearly what she was, knelt and gathered her children in her arms. For a moment, the regal composure cracked and Jackson saw relief and love so intense it made his chest tight. When she rose and approached him, Jackson felt like he should bow or kneel or at least comb his hair. Instead, he just stood there feeling supremely aware of his patched flight suit and the grease stains on his gloves. "You are Captain Jackson Thorne," she said. Her voice carried the same musical quality as her children's, but with deeper harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. "Yes, Your Majesty?" He wasn't sure of the proper form of address. "I am Lirelei, Empress of the Zephyrian Collective." She studied his face with those impossible eyes. You risked your life to save my children. Anyone would have done the same. She smiled at that, an expression both sad and knowing. No, Captain Thorne, anyone would not have. Empress Lyra Lee reached into her robes and withdrew something that made Jackson's breath catch. It was a crystal, but unlike any mineral he'd seen in years of asteroid mining. This one pulsed with its own inner light, shifting through colors that didn't seem to exist in normal space. It was roughly the size of his palm, cut into facets that caught and held the docking bay's harsh lighting. Among my people, she said, there is no greater honor than the starlight bond. This crystal has been in my family for 1,000 years. It will recognize you as kin, as protector, as one chosen. I can't accept, Jackson started. You already have. She pressed the crystal into his hands, and the moment his skin touched its surface, something extraordinary happened. The crystal grew warm, then hot, then somehow beyond temperature entirely. Light poured through his fingers, and he felt something fundamental shift inside him. It was as if the crystal was writing itself into his DNA, becoming part of him on a molecular level. When the light faded, the crystal had changed. It was smaller now and somehow integrated into the skin of his palm, like an organic implant. He could feel it pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. What did you do to me? He whispered. I gave you a gift that is also a burden. Empress Lyra Lee replied. The crystal will protect you, guide you, and call upon you when the need is great. You are no longer simply Captain Jackson Thorne, asteroid miner. You are Jackson Thorne, guardian of the Starlight Bond. Before he could ask what that meant, she and her children were gone, boarding their elegant ship and disappearing into the star-studded darkness beyond the station. Jackson stood alone in the docking bay, staring at his palm where the crystal now resided. It pulsed gently, casting faint patterns of light on the metal walls around him. Well, Commander Reeves said finally, that was interesting. Jackson looked up at him, then back at his transformed hand. Something told him that interesting was just the beginning. The weight of starlight. 3 weeks after the rescue at Helix 7, Jackson Thorne discovered that saving royal children came with a price he hadn't anticipated. The crystal embedded in his palm had turned his quiet life as an asteroid miner into something resembling a cosmic joke, played by particularly vindictive gods. It started small. The crystal would pulse when danger approached, useful but unsettling when it happened while he was drinking coffee at the station cantina. Then it began projecting holographic star maps in his sleep, showing him locations he'd never seen, with coordinates that meant nothing to him. By the 3rd week, it was having full conversations. Good morning, Guardian, the crystal said, as Jackson woke in his cramped bunk aboard the rust bucket. The voice emanated directly from his palm, though he'd learned that others couldn't hear it. It's barely dawn cycle, he grumbled, rolling out of bed. And I told you to stop calling me that. Dawn is a planetary concept. We are in space. And you are, by definition, a guardian now. Jackson had named the crystal's consciousness Prism, after it refused to provide its real name, claiming it was unpronounceable by non-crystalline vocal cords. The AI, if that's what it was, had a personality somewhere between a university professor and a sarcastic teenager. Any more exciting revelations today? Jackson asked, pulling on his flight suit. Please tell me I don't have to save any more royal families. Actually, Prism said, and the crystal's pulse quickened. We have a problem. Before Jackson could ask what kind of problem, his ship's proximity alarms began wailing. He rushed to the cockpit and stared at the tactical display in disbelief. 3 ships had dropped out of hyperspace around him. Sleek, predatory vessels with hull markings he recognized from wanted posters. Those are Vortex Syndicate ships, he muttered. The Syndicate was notorious for piracy, smuggling, and asking questions with plasma rifles. His comm system crackled to life. Captain Thorne, a woman's voice said, smooth as poisoned silk. This is Cassandra Vex. We need to talk. Jackson knew that name. Cassandra Vex was the Syndicate's best bounty hunter, famous for never missing a target and never accepting surrender. She was also rumored to be partially cybernetic, though no one had lived long enough to confirm the details. "I'm not really in a chatting mood," Jackson replied, powering up the Rust Bucket's engines. "Maybe we can schedule something for never." "I'm afraid I must insist. You have something that belongs to my employers." The crystal in his palm grew warm. "Guardian," Prism's voice whispered urgently, "the Syndicate has been hunting Starlight bonds for decades. They cannot be allowed to—" "Later," Jackson hissed, then keyed his comm. "I don't know what you think I have, but you're mistaken." Cassandra's laugh was like breaking glass. "The Zephyrian crystal, Captain. Our sensors detected its quantum signature the moment we arrived. Surrender it, and we'll make your death quick." "Counteroffer," Jackson said, throwing the Rust Bucket into a sharp dive toward the nearest asteroid field. "Go find someone else to threaten." The chase that followed would have been exhilarating if it weren't for the part where 3 heavily armed ships were trying to kill him. Jackson weaved between asteroids, using his intimate knowledge of the field to stay ahead of his pursuers. The Rust Bucket might not be fast, but she was agile, and her small size let her thread gaps that larger ships couldn't navigate. "This is only delaying the inevitable," Cassandra's voice taunted over the comm. "The crystal will consume you eventually. We're offering you mercy." "Consume me?" Jackson glanced at his palm, where the crystal was now glowing bright enough to hurt his eyes. "Prism, what is she talking about?" "The Starlight bond is demanding," the AI admitted reluctantly. "Previous Guardians have found the responsibility overwhelming." "What happened to them?" "They transcended to a higher plane of existence." "That sounds like a fancy way of saying they died." "Death is such a limited concept." A plasma blast seared past the Rust Bucket's starboard side, close enough to overload several secondary systems. Jackson cursed and pushed his ship harder, diving into a particularly dense cluster of asteroids. The Syndicate ships followed, their superior firepower useless in the tight confines. That's when the crystal decided to get creative. Without warning, energy poured from Jackson's palm and into the ship's systems. The Rust Bucket's engines suddenly roared with power he'd never felt before, and her shields flared to life with an intensity that made his hair stand on end. More importantly, he could suddenly sense the exact position and movement of every asteroid in the field. "What the—" he started. "Emergency enhancement protocol," Prism explained. "Your life was in imminent danger." Jackson didn't have time to argue. Using his newfound awareness, he threaded the Rust Bucket through an impossible series of gaps, leaving the Syndicate ships struggling to follow. One of them clipped an asteroid and spun out of control. The other 2 pressed on, but they were falling behind. He was starting to think he might actually escape when his enhanced senses detected something else. 2 more ships approaching fast from outside the field. These ones were different, sleeker, more elegant, and they were broadcasting Zephyrian identification codes. "This is Wing Commander Stellaris of the Zephyrian Imperial Guard," a crisp voice announced. "Captain Thorne, you are under our protection. Syndicate vessels withdraw immediately or face destruction." "Like hell," Cassandra snarled over the comm. "The bounty on that crystal is worth more than your entire—" Her transmission cut off as the Zephyrian ships opened fire. The plasma beams that lanced out were like nothing Jackson had ever seen. Not just destructive, but beautiful, trailing streams of silver fire through the void. One of the Syndicate ships simply ceased to exist. The other began broadcasting surrender signals. Cassandra's ship, larger and more heavily armored, managed to return fire before jumping to hyperspace. Her parting message was personal. "This isn't over, Thorne. The Syndicate always collects its debts." As the immediate danger passed, Jackson felt the crystal's enhancement fading. The Rust Bucket's systems returned to normal, leaving him feeling oddly hollow. He accepted the Zephyrian ship's escort back to Helix 7, his mind reeling with questions. The Zephyrian commander who met him at the docking bay was nothing like Empress Lyralai. Where she had been graceful and serene, Stellaris was all sharp angles and barely contained energy. Her silver uniform bore metals that seemed to shift and move when he wasn't looking directly at them. "Guardian Thorne," she said, offering a formal, "Cool. The Empress sends her regards and her apologies." "Apologies for what?" "For not warning you about the burden you now carry." Stellaris gestured toward his palm where the crystal pulsed steadily. The Starlight Bond is not merely a symbol of honor. It is a responsibility that spans star systems. She led him to a private conference room where they could speak without being overheard. Once seated, she continued, "There are 12 Starlight Bonds in existence. Each one chooses a guardian who serves as protector, mediator, and, when necessary, warrior for the cause of peace." "I didn't sign up to be anybody's warrior," Jackson protested. "The crystal chose you based on your actions, not your preferences," Stellaris replied. "You risked your life for strangers, for children who meant nothing to you. That selflessness is exactly what the bond seeks." "And if I don't want this responsibility?" Stellaris was quiet for a long moment. "The previous guardian of your crystal was a merchant captain named Torrin Blackheart. He tried to remove the bond forcibly. The crystal's defenses liquefied his nervous system." Jackson felt a chill. "So I'm stuck with this." "You are bonded with something greater than yourself," she corrected. "The question is whether you'll fight against it or learn to work with it." Over the following days, Stellaris taught him about the crystal's capabilities. It could enhance his physical abilities, provide him with knowledge he'd never learned, and connect him to the other guardians across the galaxy. More importantly, it would call upon him when innocent lives were in danger. Not just Zephyrian lives, but any lives worth saving. "The bond doesn't discriminate," Stellaris explained during one of their training sessions. "It serves the cause of justice, regardless of species or politics." Jackson was practicing channeling the crystal's energy, making it glow brighter or dimmer at will, when Prism suddenly spoke up. "Guardian, we have an incoming priority signal." A holographic display materialized above his palm, showing the face of a young human woman with desperate eyes. "Please," she said, "if anyone receives this, we need help. Our colony ship is under attack by raiders. They're taking the children, and our defenses won't hold much longer. We're at coordinates." The transmission cut off abruptly. Stellaris looked at Jackson expectantly. "The choice is yours, Guardian. You could return to your mining operation, pretend you never heard this call. The crystal won't force you to act." Jackson stared at the fading hologram, thinking of 3 silver-eyed children huddled in the wreckage of a luxury liner. He thought of little Vega clinging to him with glowing fingers, trusting him to keep her safe. "Prism," he said finally. "Plot a course for those coordinates." "Are you certain, Guardian? This path leads to danger, responsibility, and probable complications." Jackson grinned, the expression feeling strange on his face after so many days of worry. "Yeah, well, apparently I specialize in complications." As the Rust Bucket prepared for departure, now equipped with upgraded systems courtesy of the Zephyrian Guard, Jackson found himself thinking about Empress Lyralee's words. She had called the crystal both gift and burden, and now he was beginning to understand what she meant. He wasn't just Jackson Thorne anymore. He was something more, something that would be called upon whenever the innocent needed protection. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely insane. It was also, he was surprised to discover, exactly what he wanted to be. The stars stretched out before him as the Rust Bucket jumped to hyperspace, carrying its guardian toward whatever crisis awaited. In his palm, the Starlight Bond pulsed steadily, a reminder that some responsibilities were worth accepting, no matter the cost. Behind them, in the elegant ship that had been shadowing the station, Wing Commander Stellaris smiled and opened a comm channel to the Empress. "Your Majesty," she reported, "I believe you chose well. Guardian Thorne has accepted his calling." Across the galaxy, Empress Lyralee nodded, her mirror-bright eyes reflecting starlight as she watched her children sleep safely in their beds. 12 guardians now carried the Starlight Bonds, and each one had been chosen for their capacity to choose others over themselves. The universe was vast and dangerous, full of those who would prey upon the innocent. But it was also full of people like Jackson Thorne, ordinary souls who became extraordinary when circumstances demanded it. The crystal network pulsed with shared purpose, connecting 12 guardians across the void, each one ready to answer the call when it came. And it would come. It always did. But for now, there were children to save. And Jackson Thorne was exactly where he belonged, racing through hyperspace toward whatever impossible situation awaited him next, with a sarcastic crystal AI for company and a ship held together by determination and spare parts. Some people were born heroes, others had heroism thrust upon them. And some, like Jackson, discovered that heroism had been inside them all along, waiting for the right moment to shine.